So after these introductions, I'm going to hand over to Oliver Escobar, who is going to share some first thoughts on disconnection.
Thanks, Alison. It's great to be here. Welcome, everybody. We've been dreaming of this session for some time, and we're really glad to have the opportunity to share with you some of these ideas, poems, and music. And it's been a great festival so far. So for those of you who've been already to the previous sessions, thanks for sticking with us. And for those of you who are joining us now, the good news is that there are still quite a few sessions coming, and we will tell you more about that towards the end. But in my introduction, what I want to do is to talk a little bit about democracy, because in my case, as Alison said, I work for Edinburgh University, and I'm interested in the politics of change. I'm interested in how democracy might be able to reinvent itself so that we can really tackle the issues of our time. And of course, reforming and reimagining the criminal justice system is central to any project of reimagining our society in ways that might be more desirable than the state of affairs just now. Now, there's a long tradition in democratic thinking, and there are different ways of thinking about democracy. Some people think about it as a system, as a set of institutions, a set of organizations, the stuff that you will see, reported in the media, that kind of thing. But there is another way of thinking about democracy. It's a way of thinking about democracy that is based on community life, the way communities are brought together, the way communities imagine themselves and better themselves, the way people gather in order to make things happen. And that tradition of democracy as community life goes back to the very beginnings of humanity. It was the very first system of self-governance that we invented, just sitting around campfires, circles, small communities, well before we started to develop the more complex systems that we now call democracy. Now, we've had a few warnings in history about the risks to a narrow version of democratic life. The quote that is there on the screen is by an educator from the States called John Dewey. This was almost 100 years ago, just in between the two world wars, and as totalitarian, autocratic dictatorships and regimes were flourishing all over Europe and in other parts of the world. And he sent us this warning, which I think it still stands the test of time today. He says, everywhere there are waves of criticism and doubt as to whether democracy can meet pressing problems. Wherever it has fallen, democracy had not become part of the bone and blood of the people in daily conduct of its life. Democratic forms were limited to parliament, elections, and combats between parties. What is happening proves conclusively that unless democratic habits of thought and action are part of the fiber of a people, political democracy is insecure. It cannot stand in isolation. It must be buttressed by the presence of democratic methods in all social relationships. Essentially, what Dewey was telling us is that if we see democracy as something that someone else does on our behalf, then democracy is in trouble. Democracy is everyone's business because it shapes the way we relate to each other, the way we think about the issues that concern us, the way we relate to our communities, the way we try to solve problems, the way we try to address wrongdoing, and so on and so forth. So in this, today we are thinking of democracy as a way of life and of democratic practice as the kind of things that people do in order to connect communities and make communities places where people can flourish in relationship with others. And of course, that is a very kind of utopian version of what democracy could be. And we might not see that at play in the standard spaces of democratic life, but we certainly see it in communities and communities like Distant Voices. against the tide of the type of societies we've been building for some time. Societies where there is growing disconnection and a growing void of collective imagination and solidarity. And justice worlds and the systems and relationships that sustain them are riddled by those kind of disconnections within people and between people, within communities and between communities, within and between institutions, and between people, communities, and institutions. And it's almost like a paradox that at a time of hyperconnectivity and telecommunications and unimaginable technologies, unimaginable just a few decades ago, we are kind of growing this critical mass of disconnection and fragmentation. I'm going to hand over back to Alison. I'll return to these ideas of democratic life after we think a little bit more about this connection.
Thanks, Oliver. I'm just going to pick up on disconnection within the context of criminal justice specifically. So, as been made very clear in the previous two events, crime and criminal justice efforts tend to have the profound and compounding effect of disconnection and disenfranchisement. Making Things New is a sub-project of Distant Voices, a group of the Unbound community, a very diverse group of people, former prisoners, people on community sentences, people who work in criminal justice, people who study, musicians, Vox staff, worked with Pádraig Ó Tuama, a poet, to make a collection of poetry on themes of coming home. I'll explain a bit more about the process of making them in a moment, but now let's listen to a group of these poems which explore ideas of disconnect, voiced by various folks from Unbound.
Didn't show remorse. I know that men in here write letters, almost nightly, to the people that they've wronged. We know it's right to write them, wrong to send them. We know we interrupted, so we shut up in here, with nothing more than time to occupy us.
Prove your ID. To prove my identity is impossible. I don't exist. Now my children are adult, I've lost the important things. I feel like I'm viewing life through a portal. It's overwhelming. I'm out of touch with the reality of this new society. My children are adult, I've lost the important things. I can't relate to what's going on. I am an alien, out of touch with the reality of society, isolated and missing prison. I can't relate to what's going on, an alien in a pace of life that's just too fast. I'm isolated and miss prison. Though I'm out, I feel like a prisoner, and the pace of life is too fast. I feel like I'm viewing life through a portal. It's overwhelming. Even though I'm out, I am a prisoner. My identity is impossible. I don't exist.
License. Damned if I say no, and damned if I try to make a go of it on my license. My girlfriend had a baby, hers and mine, and I'm struggling to get a job that I can keep. I'm on a waiting list, a dozen or 100, anything at all. One phones me up and says there's work if I have a licence, but I've got another kind of licence if you follow, and I'm mandated to some dates with a social worker. I'm prohibited from being in certain places. I come with complications to the job. I'm still waiting. I'm a young man with an old man's pride. I'd like to work, to provide, to put food on the table, but not able. There's a stinking lie in licence. There's a chain around me. I say to her, I'll watch the wee man, but I can't even buy a nappy because all the shops stop alcohol along with bread and cheese and nappies. Have a licence to sell tenants? I can't go. Aldi, Spar, even fucking Tesco's, all of them as dangerous to me as the bar just down the road. Don't get me wrong, I don't want samples of anything much stronger than a proper cup of tea. I go to meetings once a week, or if I need more. but I wish my higher power would sort out my parole and the licence that controls my poor parenting. I'm stuck at home, watching her go out to work and out to shop, and worrying some cop will stop me on the street and inquire about the company I've been keeping. I'm barely keeping up. I go to meetings then come home, making every effort at keeping my conditions, not breaking them. I'm permitted half an opportunity and asked to make it double what it cannot be. I committed crimes, I know, and I know this as well. Licensing is hell if you're hoping to make good.
There is no such thing as the system. My first day as a social worker, I hear that most people don't feel like they belong to the system. Most people in the system are good. The system sometimes knows it's a system. The system sometimes denies it's a system. When the system denies it's a system, that's when the system does its most powerful work. There are always ways to make the system work for you, provided the system works for you. The system can change. The system has already changed. The system doesn't change. The system is a story that doesn't know its own story. The system's story's fixed. On my first day as a social worker, I learnt about the system and how the system isn't the system for everyone in the system.
As you left them. Things might not be where you left them, and Linda doesn't work at the co-op anymore. You might be surprised by who has stuck around. Everyone has a phone now, even the kids. Peter doesn't work at the co-op anymore. He had no support. Everyone has a phone now. Even the kids know which boxes to tick and when. There's not enough support, and so-called social media isn't very social. Remember, there'll always be that box to tick. Use your phone. Everything's all online now. Social media isn't very social, and you'll be surprised by who hasn't stuck around. Everything's online now. Check your email, your phone. Things might not be as you left them.
Just going to hand right over to Oliver after those powerful words.
Thanks. It's really difficult to follow after such powerful poems. But I think they tell us a lot about disconnection. They tell us about divides across communities and systems. They tell us about the personal and collective journeys of trying to navigate an unjust criminal justice system. And of course, when we're faced with such a context, and what is it that we can do? And that was when I joined the team, the research team, almost 5 years ago now. I was thinking, how do we talk about the politics of change in such a challenging environment when so many people are trying to work to remake and reimagine? And to me, there is this notion of, what happens when the fabric of democratic life is broken? What happens when the fabric of our systems and communities is broken? We need to engage in the work of mending, the work of repair, and the work of Caroline Hendricks and others on democratic mending and repair is very illustrative on this. It refers to the intentional, creative, everyday practices that seek to repair and renew connections in the fabric of democratic life. And it's all about the connective practices, the kind of connective practices that we see in Distant Voices and in many other communities of practice, inquiry. And the point is to build community. The point is to develop a collective capacity for action. And here is where I think Distant Voices has been quite an eye-opener for me, and I know for many others within the community, because we have learned a lot about the acts of democratic repair that go into remaking our communities, the kind of ways in which we choose to meet and relate to each other and make things together. in the face of a broken justice system. And it is a system that has a lot going on for it. It has a political system that multiplies the worst effects that are already kind of built and embedded in current ways of working. And of course, although I'm kind of oversimplifying, and there's plenty of people across all kinds of, from all kind of perspectives within the criminal justice system trying to bring about change, but we do face a tide of challenges and all kinds of dynamics of othering, and those are the kind of dynamics that divide us and divide communities and drive fragmentation, polarization, simplification, all the kind of things that get in the way of meaningful change. To me, this is where this word prefiguration, it's quite an exciting concept. It is a strange word for a beautiful idea. What it tries to get at is this notion that as we try to seek change, as we try to make change happen, the ways in which we choose to act, the ways in which we choose to gather and work together should be reflective of the kind of future we're trying to bring about. And to me, that was, I knew the concept before joining Distant Voices, but I had never seen a community of practice and a community of inquiry that really tried to live up to the possibilities of prefiguration. And that's, to me, Distant Voices is a prefigurative community because it tries to act according to the values of the kind of futures that it tries to bring about. It tries to walk the talk of the kind of relational foundations, the way we connect to each other, that might be able to bring forward the kind of desirable futures that we are seeking to bring about. And we are not going to enter into a lot of the detail of the research today, but there are papers coming and other ways of sharing, so please do stay in touch, because our research is quite rich in examples of this kind of prefigurative practices that try to embody the values, the principles, the practices of more desirable futures. I've posted there some of those basic principles and practices. They won't be new to you, but these things are beautiful on paper, but even more beautiful when you see a community striving to be inclusive, to be respectful, to be mindful of each other through reciprocity, to create a sense of belonging in difference, to create a sense of community, epistemic diversity, that means welcoming and embracing the diversity of ways of knowing and the diversity of knowledges that make our communities rich and powerful. And spaces for dialogue where people talk in ways that empower others to speak. Spaces for learning where we really try to have a humble kind of approach to understanding that no one has all the pieces of the puzzle, and we need to collectively find ways of putting those pieces together so that hopefully a better image of the world emerges. And that takes us to that territory of solidarity, which is, of course, is going to be a key topic in the final conversation next week. So Distant Voices works towards democratically repairing the voids of criminal justice by building community. And it does so by making things together, and Alison is going to illustrate that a little bit in a second. All kinds of sessions and spaces where we build things together. Music, of course, but also poems, other types of art and performance, all kinds of conversations and dialogues. By sharing and trying to put out there in the world some of these ideas, some of these practices, and inviting others to join in this community of doing and thinking. And by learning from that, sharing the learning, and keeping that circle of learning and action going. And that's what we've tried to do throughout the project. And there are, of course, already lots of things that you will have seen during the festival that speak to that. And there's still as well more to come. I'm going to hand over to Alison now to actually give us some more specific examples of the kind of connective practices that help us with democratically repairing this broken justice system.
It's a large claim, Oliver, but thanks. I'll at least give some examples of things we've been experimenting with. There's also some really interesting conversation going on in the chat box, a couple of comments and questions that will be really good to pick up later on. So absolutely aim to do that. But for now, I'll give you a couple of examples of projects that we've been working on that I think speak into this topic. In Inverness, we've been doing some really interesting work, and when I'm explaining our work to someone for the first time, I often draw on examples of what we've been doing there. We've been working with some really excellent practitioners in the prison and in the local community and in recovery networks in Inverness, and together we've run songwriting workshops in prison with prisoners and prison staff, officers, managers, NHS, education staff, and people from the local community with experience of recovery from addictions, all working together. These workshops have created amazing connections between superficially unlikely people through the intense experience of making new songs together. In the prison, prisoners and staff alike have commented on the changes in how they see each other and how they communicate as a result. We've then shared songs in Inverness and in the Highlands more widely, in prison gigs, in training workshops with social workers and other practitioners, and in local pubs and venue spaces, taking these songs into conversations with whoever happens to be there and wants to engage with them. The sharing of these songs raises questions, sparks connections between people, and disrupts the status quo a little bit. I think that this is a form of creative connective practice, a practice of repair and reconnection between people. Another example, the second example I'm going to give today, which we've already heard some poems from, is Making Things New. As I mentioned before, diverse members of the Unbound community worked together to write these poems, with Pádraig and me weaving together the process as we went. This included some preliminary work. We spent 2 Tuesday evenings at Unbound sharing stories of coming home after prison. Phil collated interviews and songs from the wider Distant Voices research material, and I pulled together some news articles on public perceptions and drivers that were presented in the media, and went armed with all of this pre-work and discussions. We went away on a residential together. We spent the weekend writing poems, writing new things from scratch, with Pádraig facilitating conversations and writing, making meals together, eating together, sharing songs in the evening together, and had a lovely time in a slightly strange big house in Ayrshire. And then after that, Pádraig worked to draft a collection of poems edited and woven from our collective writing. We then spent over the next few months 2 further Unbound Tuesday evenings coming together as a group and discussing the drafts of the poems. And then actually these conversations around the drafts resulted in further new poems that added more insight and nuance to the topic of coming home, which Pádraig then honed together the whole kind of collection of poems. And then we recorded, as you heard earlier, a selection of the poems at Unbound one Tuesday evening with help from Urie. We then, in February 2020, shared some of these poems in workshops with an invited group of guests of people with influence in practice, policy, politics and media in Scotland. And we asked these people to engage with the poems and, albeit largely entirely outside of their comfort zone, write some group songs in response to these poems, which resulted in very interesting conversations. This was obviously just before COVID-19 hit, and it was just before the public launch of the poetry collection at the planned Distant Voices Festival in April 20, which had to be shelved and has been reworked into the event that you're currently in. But while we couldn't see the project through to completion at that point in time, what the process had done was cement a really strong core of people at the heart of Unbound who were able to hold together and navigate the worst of the disintegrative pandemic. And despite a lot of grief, pain, conflict and disruption, hold the hope of building on from it. We have held it together, and now we're able to get together with new people joining us and new creative energy flowing. The creative energy extends also to cakes. This laptop is currently sitting on a cake box brought by a new member to Unbound who's come to be part of things in the last few weeks, which is really fun and energizing. The poems haven't been forgotten. They will be launched next year when published, hopefully, with we've got a Scottish publishing house whose name I always pronounce wrongly. I think it's Urie, who are going to publish the poems in a pamphlet in May, hopefully May 2022, and we hope to host some events at that time. These two stories that I've just shared of the processes and practices involved in some of the Distant Voices work, I think are creative, connective practices. Through making together, spaces have been made where we've been able to see each other a bit better, understand a bit more, walk with each other, and imagine afresh how we want to make our lives and the society we live in. I'm going to listen to a song now, written in Inverness. Well, actually, it wasn't written in Inverness. It was written by someone from Inverness, Mark Holloway, along with Lucy Cathcart-Frodin, I think both of whom are on the call. It was written on a core group residential. The core group is a significant part of how the research project has worked with a diverse set of people involved in bringing their expertise to the table. The package, the song we're about to hear, was written as part of that. I'm going to introduce it through Mark's words. So Mark says, the story is about a journey my brother and I took to drop off my dad at his mum's following another alcohol-related misadventure which had plagued his and our family lives. And this was the last straw for mum, hence not known at this address. But it's also about forgiveness and understanding and love and acceptance. I work with people in the prison system. The content of the song also recognises the personal experience that I and many professionals or practitioners bring into the workplace. It highlights our shared humanity, relationships and life experiences that cut across professional roles or labels, perceptions attached to us by others.
Delivering a package that nobody wants. The smell of failure lingers from your usual haunts. Two souls in a tin can travel a familiar road. The package bound for no fixed abode. Delivering a package that's plagued with misdirection. The message lost, all lines cut with no connection. Two souls in a tin can struggle with the heavy weight. Return to sender, the package seals its fate. Not known at this address, contents broken. His last post. The soldiers try to exercise the ghost. The soldiers try to exercise the ghost. Cargo delivered, job done, return to base. This isolation like the vacuum of space. Two souls in a tin can have time to sit and contemplate. The package broken left to its own fate. Snow and silence fall as we travel along. Try as we might, we cannot right all wrongs. Distance and time fill the void between two souls, wondering how it could have been. Not known at this address, contents broken, life a mess. The bugler plays his last post. The soldiers try to exercise the ghost. The soldiers try to exercise the ghost.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Claire, and thank you, Mark and Lucy, for that amazing song, The Package. It was cut short slightly. It's a very long song, but there's a full-length version on Bandcamp, and the link is there on the chat for you to listen to afterwards. Please do. I'm going to introduce the next thing that we're going to listen to is another poem from the Making Things New collection. It's called Bad Letter Day, and it is a poem written through the group conversations, actually, in the kind of drafting and editing process. That Pádraig kind of clocked a conversation through a story told by Martin, and it sort of connects a very upsetting experience with being seen and what that made despite the circumstances. So here we go, Bad Letter Day.
Bad letter day. I saw my sisters writing on the letter, sitting in the hall, surrounded by all the other men, those serving sentences, those watching those serving sentences. I felt my body trembling as I tore it home. All I saw were words: dog, dead, dog, dead, dog, dead. I couldn't read the sense in what was senseless. I couldn't calm my mind from all the noise from all the boys, with their spoons and forks and knives, and clattering of plates and practising of petty hates and rivalries. I stared at the place where the sunlight hits the wall, hoping it would all go away. I was 18 and brave, not 18 and crime. Maybe people saw, maybe not. We all got news from home from time to time. News of people dying, news of change, news of debt and death and worry. My sister wrote to tell me that my dog was dead, and I was gulping sobs instead of casserole. I'd been told I shouldn't cry inside. He sometimes heard a fella try to hide his weeping, maybe late at night, or he saw him fighting back his tears, while men make lots of noise. Bad letter day, I heard the officer say. I looked away, but not from harm. I used my arm to wipe my face. Take the afternoon, son, he said. Nobody will hear you in the cell. I walked the quiet corridor. I closed the door. I fell onto my bed and I cried because my dog had died. I tried to think of how to thank the man who gave my privacy some privacy. He'd be long retired now, a gentleman, a golfer, a man from up the Highlands. If I found him, I could shake his hand and thank him. If I wrote to him, I'd write to him and say he gave me dignity that day. If I saw him, I could thank him for the way he made my bad day the kind of bad day I'd survive.
Again, very difficult to follow. It almost feels wrong to speak after that. It's just, such a powerful set of images and connections and disconnections, and it really speaks to the power of relationships in rebuilding, reimagining. We are conscious that we've been sharing things with you for quite a while now, and we will really like to have the opportunity to go into small groups just for a few minutes. We don't have a lot of time, but just for a few minutes to share your reflections and reactions, and to try and kind of, I suppose we have a couple of questions for you, maybe as prompts that you might want to use. One of them is what came to mind as you were listening to the poems and to the songs? And then have you experienced connective practices, and what made them so? What is it that makes possible those connections that then have the power to help remake and reimagine communities? So I'm gonna ask our colleagues to set us for the breakout groups, and we are gonna have just 8 minutes, so please do share the time, and hopefully that gives you the opportunity to share some reflections, but also potentially some of your own stories of connection or reconnection. Okay, let's do this. Enjoy the chat. It's great to see people back. We are really sorry that we cut those conversations this short. We're trying to keep it within the hour as promised. But hopefully you made some connections and got a chance to offer some short reflections. We do have a few minutes just to share whatever was coming up in the conversation, and you might do that in two ways. We would love to hear from a couple of people, just switching on the microphones and just hearing what you have to say, and then for everyone else, we would also love it if you can just type some notes on the chat so that everyone can get a sense of the kind of things that came up. So now we enter that awkward moment where I ask for one or two people to give us a flavor of where the conversation was taking you. Who's going to help us with that?
Well, our conversation took us to the line where the guy said, it's right to write, but not right to send a letter. And we were wondering if writing stuff down helps people. If it is a healing process, writing stuff down, and I guess it is. But not sending the letter to people that you've supposedly wronged might be the best way to go, not to send a letter to them, because it just brings up pain.
Thanks, William. And of course, we have here with us Pádraig as well, who is the poet who facilitated many of the sessions where the poems were created. And I don't know if I speak only for myself, but I think when we write, writing is a way of thinking, a way of relating to others, isn't it? And sometimes we only work out what is it that we think and feel as we try to write or compose or create something. Any other contribution that people might want to bring to the plenary? And please do write in the chat as well. The chat is going to be open for a few minutes, so it'll be great to hear your thoughts, and we'll take those away and feed into what's coming next as well.
I was just going to say in the chat, which is this question of letters being written and not sent, or being sent, or how things are communicated is a really key theme and a giant on Monday, if anyone's interested to tune in and think about that a bit more.
That is such a skillful way of plugging the next session, Joe. That is brilliant.
Was not at all manufactured.
No, that is brilliant. A giant on the bridge is something really, really special. We really hope that people can join us on Monday evening. Alison, I wonder if there's anything coming up in the chat, or we still have a minute or two if anyone else would like to share.
I think Gary might have had his hand up.
Yeah, not to say too much, but I think what we talked about lots of things, and We talked about vulnerability, and you know what vulnerability is about. We're just starting to get in a good conversation about vulnerability, I think. We talked about authenticity and, you know, the power and the things that we've seen as, you know, it's real voices from real people talking about their situation. It's really powerful. We talked about, I suppose, bridging the void as well, like and trying to bridge the void in lots of ways, and you know, through creativity and through other means. So that was just some of the things we touched on.
That's super helpful, Gary. Thank you so much. And of course, for me, one of the most powerful things throughout the project has been just seeing that process where, you know, an individual experience enters the collective imagination, either through music or through some of the other arts mediated community making activities that were involved throughout the project. And that's how we turn individual experiences into collective experiences. And to me, that is the foundation for change. On that note, I'm gonna get back to Alison, who's gonna help us to gently go towards the end of the session.
A gentle end. Yeah, there's loads of really interesting comments here in the chat box that we don't have time to delve into, but I think we'll absolutely sort of get these written up and sort of add into our thinking going forward. Questions of where we can manage to create level playing fields to see each other, and yeah, the kind of the strand of dignity running through all of this, I think is really interesting stuff. So lots of more food for thought for future conversations. Just now, I'm going to kind of wrap things up formally, but then we're going to share a song as we end as well. So thanks for joining us and for all the contributions that have been made, and for feeding things back on the text box there as well, and keep that rolling. Just now, it'll be open for the next 10 minutes or so. As mentioned already, the next event is A Giant on the Bridge, a feature-length concert film on Monday night, the premiere of that, which will be really amazing. The trailer looks fascinating. So please come to that. And please also keep an eye on our website. The link has just been posted there in the chat. Over the next few weeks, our 6-part podcast series, The Art of Bridging, launches first thing this Saturday morning, and the remaining episodes will continue, I think, fortnightly on the website and all other podcast listening platforms over the next few weeks. And I've had a sneak preview at the first episode, and it's brilliant stuff woven together, and lots of the themes that we've been discussing today are come loud and clear and have different angles and insights into them throughout. Once the podcast series has concluded, and when the films of the festival gigs and of A Giant on the Bridge are going to be up on YouTube early next year, we'll also be publishing a series of learning resources, and they will be of use in group work or educative contexts that people might work in, or just for interest. And so, yeah, we really want to keep this dialogue continuing. So please do use these resources where and when you can, and let us know how you use them. That'd be really useful to hear as well. And please do complete the online survey. The link will be up on the chat just now. Your feedback is going to be really important for us to keep learning from here. And thanks for coming. Please do keep in touch. We really do want to keep the conversation flowing. And so to conclude this session, aware that we're at time, but for those who've got time to stay on, we're going to have a listen to A Leap from the Noise. A Leap from the Noise was written by Martin B. with Ross Clark. There are many Martins. Martin B. with Ross Clark. In Martin's words of introduction, this song was about a memory of happy times with my brother. It then became more about what it meant to find tranquility and question why we need tranquility in our lives. I think it's a hopeful song, both lyrically and sonically, and seems like a fitting way to end things today. So thanks so much for being here. Please stay on the chat box as we listen to this song, and please, let's keep the conversation flowing from here.
Like a dream from a wishing well, my trawler eyes take everything in while I'm walking down the snake path like a hypnotist under a spell. A break from the sadness, disconnection from madness. I leap from the noise, relief in the shadows, crying out for more, like a